I'd like to welcome you to our second UMARC webinar this spring that compares the theology and the organizational life of the United Methodist Church, as well as the new denomination that has begun to form in the past few days, the Global Methodist Church. I'm Dr. Harvey Martz. I'm an ordained elder in the Mountain Sky Conference. I retired 10 years ago after serving 18 years as the lead pastor of St. Andrew Church, a large congregation in the Denver suburb of Highlands Ranch, Colorado, one of the largest reconciling congregations in Methodism. I'm also the vice chair of the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy and Friends, a group that was formed under the leadership of my colleague, Dr. Don Messer, who's on the screen, about 5 years ago, shortly after the election and consecration of our beloved Bishop Kieran Oliveto. The purpose of our group, which now has a mailing list of some 1,500 clergy and laypersons across the world, include providing unwavering support of Bishop Oliveto and advocating for full inclusion of LGBTQI clergy and members in United Methodism, our commitment to stand in solidarity with LGBTQI clergy, laity, and candidates for ministry, and working to ensure the dignity and safety of all persons in church and society. We have been and we will be attempting, in the words of St. Paul, to have the mind of Christ. And for us, that means one thing is following Christ's example of having a welcoming and inclusive spirit, as well as a humble and serving heart. And as we read scripture, we see a Jesus who stands for an open heart and mind and who keeps widening the circle and extending the table and inviting into the family anyone who has been otherized and demonized, even by religious leaders. Of course, the open heart of Christ was one of the things that got him into trouble. We also feel compelled to follow the example of the early community of the followers of the way, as we read in the 8th chapter of the book of Acts about the evangelist Philip welcoming on the road a man who was a Gentile, a Black man, and a sexual outcast. They read Isaiah together, and then, of course, Philip enthusiastically baptizes this man, welcomes him into the community. This is a profoundly subversive story, even for today, and it exemplifies Jesus' quotation from the prophet Isaiah, "My house shall be a house of prayer for all people." For all people. We feel compelled to follow that subversive prophet, Jesus of Nazareth, in his ministry of inclusion and not exclusion. We pray and work for the Methodist movement to be as inclusive as our Lord is. And we feel shame and pain for our LGBTQI sisters and brothers for the time when their church has failed to exhibit the mind of Christ toward them and others. And we know, dear sisters and brothers, that this pain and rejection are still happening, and we are working very hard to change that. I mentioned earlier today's webinar is one of 3 events that UMARC is sponsoring. Our first webinar, Should We Stay or Should We Go?, is recorded and available on our website, umarc.org. We had over 1,000 persons registered for that last month. Today's event has now over 850 persons registered as we discuss looking before we leap. And I want to introduce our resource people for this event in just a moment. I want to tell you about the third webinar we have coming up on June 22nd, the evening of June 22nd, entitled Gladly Choosing to be UMC. We are still assembling all of the leaders for that event, but we have already invited and included our friend Reverend Adam Hamilton, lead pastor at Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. We will keep you informed about other participants by email as soon as we learn those. I am now privileged to introduce to you our leaders for today's event. On our screen, you will see my colleague, Dr. Don Messer, chair of the UMARC group, president emeritus of Isla School of Theology, founder and director of the Center for Health and Hope. Don and I will both be off the screen as soon as I have introduced and prayed before our formal beginning. I'm also honored to introduce Reverend Dr. Rebekah Miles, Susanna Wesley Professor of Theology and Ethics at Perkins School of Theology at SMU, one of my seminary alma maters. Becca has done so much great work for us at getting us to this good place today, and she has become, for me, a new friend and esteemed partner in the work for an inclusive church. I'm honored to welcome back my friend and colleague, Dr. Izzy Alvaran, the Director of Reconciling Ministries Network and a Central Conference leader from the Philippines. Becca and Izzy did a superb job last month in answering and resourcing your questions and comments. We're honored to have also with us Reverend David Livingston, pastor of Old Mission United Methodist Church in Fairway, Kansas, who's done some extremely important writing for the church in his Buyer Beware essay, and that is printed on our UMARC website. I heartily commend that essay to you. Reverend Livingston is also a two-time General Conference delegate. Next, I'm honored to introduce from the Florida Conference, Derrick Scott III, a three-time lay delegate to General Conference and co-lay leader in the Florida Conference. Derrick is the executive director and United Methodist campus minister for the Wesley Foundation in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, Florida. I'm honored to welcome Martha Stokes, lay leader for the Virginia Conference and five-time lay delegate to General Conference. She is the director of church and community relations for Pinnacle Living, a group of 5 United Methodist retirement centers in Virginia. There are 2 others I'm introducing, but will not be pictured on the screen after these introductions. Both are members of our UMARC steering committee and are retired elders in the Mountain Sky Conference. Reverend Dr. K. Palmer Marsh will be serving as our chaplain and responding to pastoral needs that are voiced in our chat room tonight. Reverend Ben Rowe, who has compiled a thorough, excellent glossary for us that is available very quickly on your website, along with other helpful resources, and will serve as our information maven during the evening, pointing persons with specific questions to the glossary and to other resources. I am honored to be part of this group tonight with these folks and with all of our participants now. To open us with a prayer, please pray with me. Gracious Spirit, we pray that our Methodist movement may be as welcoming, as inclusive, and as countercultural as our Lord Jesus Christ, and that we may tonight and always exemplify in person our mantra of open hearts, open minds, and open doors. Amen. Rebekah and Izzy.
Thanks so much, Harvey. It's great to be with you in this. And I just want to say thanks to the United Methodist Association of Retired Clergy. And also I pray God's blessing on this event and on our efforts here tonight, on those who are listening right now and those who will be listening later, and really on the whole beloved church of ours, and the work we are doing together. So thank y'all for being here. So I'm going to get right to the questions. The title of this webinar is Look Before You Leap, Examining Our Choices Between the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church. Yeah. So to the three panelists, you've all examined the choices before us and decided to stay United Methodist Church. And God knows it's not a perfect church. So, I mean, heck, even we know it's not a perfect church. So why are you committed to staying in the United Methodist Church? Let's start with Martha.
Yeah, Becca, thank you. I call myself a lifelong Methodist because I was baptized in 1961, and then I was confirmed at the same font, the same little church in rural Virginia in 1972 as a United Methodist. So being United Methodist is just the core of who I am. But I will confess that there have been times when it's been really hard to remain United Methodist. And honestly, it's been really hard to remain churched sometime. But our theology of grace centers my life, especially that the recognition that I didn't do anything to deserve God's gift of grace, and yet it continues to shape me and mold me and transform my life as I go through this spiritual journey. I value the fact that we don't all have to think alike in order to love Jesus alike, and to share in mission and ministry together, even though we might not interpret things the same way or share the same understanding of our of God or our relationship with Jesus. And then I just really value our holiness of heart and life, and that practical divinity that says we've got to live out what we believe. We've gotten this gift of grace from God. We've got to respond like we believe it and try to make a difference in the world. So I continue to be United Methodist, and I will continue to be United Methodist because the Jesus I know, the Jesus I've come to understand and follow, tells me that everybody is welcome at the table, and that there's a place in this United Methodist Church for spiritual home for everybody. And so I will be UMC.
Amen. Thank you, Martha. Derrick?
Awesome. It is so good to be with everybody this evening. My name is Derrick Scott III. I'm a campus minister in the Florida Conference. I'm also co-lay leader, and my colleague Alice Williams is in the house, and I just want to make sure I give her a shout out because she's amazing. But to the question, why am I staying in the UMC? I mean, quite frankly and personally, Jesus has not told me to leave. And so there is something just very basic when it comes to following Jesus and doing the things that I believe the Holy Spirit is calling me to do. Jesus has in many ways asked me to lean in deeper and be even more engaged in the life of this denomination. And I think one of the reasons is that my experience, 20 years of campus ministry, spending time with college-age young adults, day in and day out, this is one of the churches, one of the denominations that is best positioned to receive a generation that is asking a ton of questions, a generation who is living in a chaotic world right now. And we don't have to go down the list of all of the chaos we are experiencing in our country and throughout our world. But as I think about the young adults that I spend time with, and I think about our theology, I think about our desire to hold in tension personal and social holiness. I think about the ways that we want to continue to open the table and make room for all that are being called by the Holy Spirit into this space. I just feel like this is a church that is well positioned to serve the next generation. And so for me in my work and what I'm seeing in the next generation, it makes sense to remain and to be UMC because I just believe, not that other churches, not that other denominations do not have an angle, but I believe that we have a very specific call to the next generation. And I'm so excited about it, and I'm very committed to it.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Derrick. David, you want to get in on this one?
Sure, I'll give a short answer. For me, of course, as a lifelong United Methodist, the reality is that's part of the answer. But another piece is that when I went to seminary and I took my United Methodist doctrine class, I had these aha moments of, oh, that's why I believe what I believe. And it was just such a resonance for me, so that although we all would readily admit we're not a perfect church, we are in the Wesleyan spirit, hopefully as a church, we're moving on towards perfection, right? And that would be my hope, is that we can continue as a denomination to move on towards perfection. And there's not a better fit, even understanding the many shortcomings that we have, for me, than in this particular denomination.
Well, that's great. Well, now it's good to know you're staying. I think all of us here are going to be United Methodist moving forward. But what kind of advice, very succinct words of advice to our siblings who are considering of leaving the United Methodist Church, specifically to join the Global Methodist Church that is currently being organized, that was launched on May 1st. Derrick or Martha, are lay people?
Yeah, I can hop on in there. I have dear friends, super dear friends, who will be leaving the United Methodist Church and going to the Global Methodist Church. People who have journeyed with me, some for decades. And there is definitely an understanding theologically, there's an understanding in regard to polity, why they want to leave. And I have respect for many of them and in their desire to be in a different type of connection. I'm just mindful that in many ways, my experience and understanding of what I'm seeing come together in the Global Methodist Church is a church that desires sameness, a church that desires everyone to believe the same things. And there just aren't very many places in our world that are homogenous. And so I'm not quite sure how helpful to our witness it can be to the ways that the world looks at the church, to continue to see churches that are just believing the same things, all going in the same direction, coming from the same perspectives. I just don't know. When I think about Ephesians and when I think about the ways that Jesus is bringing those who are far and those who are near together and making them one, I don't see that Ephesians 2 moment as this homogenous group, but I see those built on the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus being the cornerstone. That's a diverse body. I think about Revelation 5 and 7. I heard every nation, tribe, and tongue standing before the Lamb. And friends, that is diversity. That is not everybody seeing the world the same way. I mean, goodness, when I think about even, you said succinct, I'll stop. I just think that in our world, one of the greatest witnesses we offer is our diversity. It is the fact that we're coming from different places, but gathered at the same table. That's my perspective. I imagine there are others, but that is one of the reasons that I would invite folks to be really careful about their decisions to leave the UMC.
Derrick, I just want to pick up and say, come Holy Spirit, come for Pentecost, since we're getting close to that. But, I think for me, it's the main piece of advice I would offer to folks trying to make a decision is to recognize that this is not a yes or no question, that this decision doesn't just come down to a vote of an individual or a congregation. It's a personal discernment about who we each want to be as followers of Jesus and how we understand that call upon our lives and the call upon how we are to share the gospel message. And so I would just encourage people to take your time. I've heard so many people say we've got to make a decision right now, and nobody has to. We can take as much time as we need to. But I think for me, it is such a personal, prayerful time to really figure out to reflect on our own faith, figure out who we are as disciples of Jesus. And that's going to take as long as it's going to take. And then together in community, we have to wrestle with that question as a congregation. So I would encourage everybody to start both personally thinking about that, and as a church to think about who we are and who we want to be in the future. Just because it's just so deeply rooted scripturally, as Derrick said, and then personally is where we are in our faith journey. So don't think it has to be a sudden decision, and it certainly is not yes or no. It's a matter of the heart.
Amen. Thank you. Jim Dozier, can we get that first poll up? It's a demographic poll about, are you lay, or are you active clergy or retired clergy? If y'all could do the poll I think it should be popping up if y'all would respond to that. And then while you're doing that, last time it was about half lay, and then the clergy were divided about half retired and half active. And while we're doing the poll, I want to move to question for David. David, one of the resources that we want to talk about tonight is your series of blog posts, Buyer Beware, which is available on the UMARC website, and people can Google it as well. And I've shared this part of your blog with probably hundreds of people because it so clearly gets at some of the crucial differences between the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church in a really fair, I think, measured and clear way. So why did you write that series, and what should buyers be wary of?
Thanks, Becca. And I chose the title for that blog series carefully because it's not "Don't Buy," it's "Buyer Beware." And there are clearly some people for whom the GMC, I think, would be a good place to be. And if that's you, then Godspeed, go, and may God bless you with that pursuit. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. So part of what I heard at the beginning of my kind of journey into that blog series was different people telling me different things about the GMC that were contradictory to each other. So part of it for me was wanting to know, I was already clear for myself that was not a denomination that I would be joining, but I wanted to hear, what really is this denomination going to be about? And of course, we know the obvious differences when it comes to the presenting issue of inclusivity. But even beyond that, what are some of the differences between the GMC and the UMC? And so that's really what it stemmed from. And excuse me, what I found was that there are a lot of differences, and that in some ways the question of inclusivity is surface for some of the deeper issues, which are not necessarily theological issues, but there's a lot of polity issues, for example, that we come across. A couple of quick examples that might surprise some people. One of the things that probably surprised me the most was the level of control within the GMC. An example of that would be that if you're in seminary, you have to have a consultation with your district superintendent. In the GMC, it's called a presiding elder. But in order to take your seminary coursework, you have to have a consultation with your district superintendent or presiding elder to do that. Another difference is that one of the things that we've heard is a concern about the power that bishops have. Bishops control the denomination. They don't control the United Methodist Church as much as some people think. But in the GMC, the bishops have tremendous power. From a practical standpoint, theologically, we would, I think the theology behind the episcopacy is similar between the two denominations. But from a practical standpoint, the bishops have immense control over the committees, for example, of the annual conference. And they have 4 different ways that they can dismiss essentially a pastor from a church with no due process for the pastor. So just a couple of quick examples, and we'll talk more about those probably later. But I think that's the piece that I would say people really need to pay the most attention to, where there'll be the most surprises, I guess I would say, is probably in those polity arrangements.
Okay, well, if you're comparing, this is.
Hey, can we announce the poll first?
Oh, of course,
I don't know
yeah.
if y'all see that. So we've got 62% laity, and then 18% and 20% active and retired clergy. So thank you so much, and we'll have some other polls as we go along. Thank you for doing that. Sorry, Izzy, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I mean, I'm really very glad that we have a lot of lay people in the House, and we have over 500 or 542 people right now. This is fantastic. Okay, so when you compare the new GMC with the United Methodist Church, what do you see as the biggest benefits or drawbacks of going to the GMC? So now we're going to try and get into the comparison. David said that there's a lot of control, but let's see, how different is it from the UMC? Benefits, drawbacks. Martha, you want to start us off?
I think just to start with, for me, is there are just more questions than there are answers right now. And recognizing this time of transition, we know things will change. Things will change as the GMC goes from the transitional book of doctrines and discipline to their first convening conference. And things will continue to change in the United Methodist Church. Someone in a presentation I did recently for the Virginia conference asked a question. They, listened to what we shared about the process for disaffiliation and the requirements. And then they said, well, what happens if our church discerns to leave, fulfills all the requirements to disaffiliate, and then realizes that we can't pay our pastor salary or maintain the church? And I think that's, not something we have an answer to right now. I don't know if in reality it's a drawback or not for leaving right now to go to the GMC, but it's certainly something that has to be a part of the discernment in terms of the future of churches as we make that decision of whether or not we stay or leave.
Thank you. Derrick?
Yeah, right in line with what Martha was just saying. I am concerned about the ways that it seems the GMC is being formed without a desire for deep connectionalism that is global, that is substantial, that makes commitments across the planet. I think about our global ministries, and I think about UMCOR. I think about all the things that we're able to do because we are all a part of this connection. And yes, paying into the connections. I know there's that scary word of apportionments, but when there's a disaster in the world, we're able to mobilize because of that connection, that power of being together, and being able to have organization, being able to have, yes, institution that allows us to act quite quickly. And so that becomes a thought there for me of something that may be very different, that if you do not have that infrastructure in place, there's just things that you cannot do together. There are just places you cannot be. And then I began to ask some questions and some thoughts about the global connection, individuals around the world who may be joining the GMC, but will not get the same kind of support that they got in the United Methodist Church. I do believe that there's going to be some differences there. And I can't speak to it if those differences that I'm seeing will actually happen, but I'm a little nervous, particularly for my friends around the world.
David, like a quick answer?
Yeah, I just would like to hold my answer, Izzy, as we get into some more of the details, just for the sake of time.
Becca?
Thank you. So David, then let's go to some of the details. So let's begin with appointments of pastors to churches. What are some of the difference in the appointments?
Yeah, sure. And I might also, as I answer that, the point I made about bishops' power, a couple of folks I saw in chat mentioned, which is true, that there's term limits to bishops. My memory, I can't say for sure, but my memory is that it's 2 6-year terms for bishops, that they're limited. So that'd be a 12-year total. Many of you who are involved in the general church, you'll remember that it's pretty darn unusual for us to elect a bishop who has more than 16 years to serve, and often they'll have 8 or 12 years to serve. So although it's true that there's a term limit, I'd argue that that's a pretty nominal difference in terms of the actual practical result of power. And in terms of appointments, this is one of the interesting points that people have misunderstood. The Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines for the Global Methodist Church has essentially an identical appointment system in terms of the consultative process with the local churches. There's a misunderstanding that they go to a much more congregational polity where the churches have more control over appointments. That's not the case. There's a little bit more clarity that there needs to be consultation than what we have now, but effectively it's the exact same system. The differences primarily are that in the GMC, a church is not guaranteed a pastor and a pastor is not guaranteed a church. And of course, we've talked about that in the UMC for a long time, whether there should be guaranteed appointments or not. I think you can make an argument either way. So that's part of that buyer beware. Some of you might really appreciate that. I do think it's important, Becca, and this goes a little bit beyond the question, but I think it's significant. One of the points that I've made for a number of years now that I've received a lot of pushback on, some of it rightfully so, is the role of women and whether women really will be accepted as pastors in the GMC. I 100% believe the leadership of the GMC that says absolutely they will. Carolyn Moore, I think, is the president, and they've accepted her leadership. Beth Ann Cook is another significant leader in the GMC. But here's the other piece. With the guaranteed appointments, those same leaders can't guarantee that women will be appointed. And so as one anecdotal piece, in 2016, the lay leader of one of the annual conferences in our country told me just point blank at General Conference in 2016 that 90% of their churches won't accept a woman as a pastor. I didn't believe him, but I've looked it up. And the 2020 numbers, it's not 90%, but it is the case that only 18% of the, or no, 12% rather, of the, I think it is 18% of the pastors in that conference are women. And for full elders, there are 3 women who are full elders of that conference. It represents 5% of the full elders of the conference. So I believe him. And so I think that while I believe the leaders who say they don't want that to be the case, and I also believe the empirical evidence that suggests that there are places at least where women will have a very difficult time finding a place in ministry without having guaranteed appointments.
Wow. I mean, there are churches today that, would tell their district superintendents, don't appoint a woman or a person of color. And imagine if there's no guaranteed appointments. So
yes, and there's no recourse for a pastor who's not appointed. There is no due process. So the only way in which there's due process is that the bishop has to write some kind of a statement that says that there's a reason why the person was not appointed. Now, for those who are concerned right now about the power of bishops in the United Methodist Church, there's examples right now where people have said the bishops have overstepped their power by not appointing a person or by moving a person to another appointment. And what we're told is that those bishops have ways to do what they want to do, even if officially that's not the way that it should be. So if that's the case now, it will be only that much more so in the GMC. And there's no question, if a bishop doesn't want to appoint a pastor, that pastor will not be appointed.
I wanted to just follow up on that. I mean, I agree with you. I think the desire to have women in ministry is a big part of the GMC leadership. And I think part of it's going to be demographics. I mean, we've had a larger lay support than clergy support. And also, I think there's been a difference in terms of clergy persons between men and women. So I think you're right. Part of it's going to be the demographics of who, there's just going to be fewer women, and that will make a difference. So thank you for that.
Well, how about property? Let's talk about property, church property. How different is it? Do they have a trust clause?
Yeah.
Pay for pension liabilities. So
let me address that, Izzy, but I also see another another comment. Somebody says in another presentation I listened to, they said that GMC pastors would be called by the church and serve as long as the church and pastor were happy. So one of the things, and I think Derrick maybe mentioned this earlier, or maybe it was Martha, but there's some uncertainty about what the GMC will really be. So I'm referencing the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines. That's the product of the Global Methodist Church. There's been several revisions to that, most recently April 12th, I think, of 2022. There's a different document, which was produced by the Wesleyan Covenant Association. It was last updated in December of 2020. And in that document, there is more of a call system. And what some people have said, even people in the WCA, is that this document is only a transitional document, and then that's the one that we're really going to follow. So what I would just say is that there are substantial differences between those two documents. There are earth-shattering kinds of differences between those two documents. And that, again, would be that buyer beware approach, that I would sure want to know what I'm getting myself into before I join a new denomination. And so we only have what we have. And what we have is clearly a working document that the leadership of the Global Methodist Church has been working on. And that's this transitional book. And in the transitional book, that's the way the appointments are handled. The trust clause that we have in the United Methodist Church that guarantees that churches will stay united with the United Methodist Church, that does go away with the GMC. The second to last draft of their book, that had what I've called a trust clause light. And in that case, again, from a very practical polity standpoint, that if a church wanted to leave the Global Methodist Church, then the denomination would take a lien on their property until their unfunded pensions were resolved. So very similar to what happens under paragraph 2553 right now with pensions. In the April book, that went away. So now there is no trust clause, period, for churches in the Global Methodist Church. Again, something that for some people will be a really big positive. I would just point out that one negative to that would be that the purpose of that trust clause light was to guarantee pensions. So without having that, there's now no backing, there's no assets backing the pension claim for pastors. And pensions and economics is not my forte, but my understanding would be that the pension claims that pastors would then have on the GMC. As churches, we don't have the government protections for our pension programs that corporations have. So I think you'd be on shaky ground as a pastor counting on a pension from the GMC without having that asset backing it.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we were mentioning terms and paragraphs. If we could make sure that we have that glossary of terms and post it on chat so they have access to that document. Becca? Or anybody else would want to answer that question? Property? Okay.
So I want to talk a little about retired pastors. We've got an organization here that's founded and run for retired pastors, even though it has a much broader reach. What are some differences between retired pastors in the Global Methodist Church as it's proposed in the United Methodist Church? Martha, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, I'll start. Older adults is my area of professional work. So when it comes to retired clergy, for the most cases, and certainly an interest of mine. I think it's paragraph 416 in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline that talks about senior status. It says that if you're not within 7 years of retirement or serving in an appointment at least quarter time, you have no vote at annual conference. You have voice, but no vote. That kind of reminds me that in John Wesley's writings, as he was getting closer to the end of his life, he made the comment that he always prayed, Lord, help me not live to be useless. And so if we're thinking about having voice and no vote at annual conference as a retired clergy person, that kind of creates in me a sense of uselessness that's there. So that's one concern for me in terms of retired clergy.
Anybody else? Okay, well, next question. How about lay people? Are there differences in the role of laity between the GMC and the UMC, or at least with the GMC?
Derrick, you want me to kick this one off, or you want to get started?
You can start, Martha, and I'll just back you up. How about that?
Okay, that's good. Either way, I think our United Methodist Book of Discipline has such a rich understanding of the ministry of all Christians. And in that is the ministry of the laity, how we work in community, that understanding that by virtue of our baptism, we are all called to be in ministry, to share the gospel message, and to live a life as disciples. And so just as I read what's in that transitional book of doctrine and discipline right now, I question if the understanding of the role of the laity is the same. Just as an example, in our United Methodist Book of Discipline, the chapter on ordained ministry has a title of the ministry of the ordained. For the GMC right now, the title of that is the ministry of the called. And I understand us all to be called. We are just called to use our gifts and graces in different ways. Some of us are set aside by the church for ordained ministry, and some of us are just called to be the best lay people and the strongest lay leaders we can be. So even just the semantics of the wording like that, just give me a little pause to wonder what the real role of the laity is in the leadership of the church. And I'd also encourage people to look at the makeup of boards and committees within the structure that's being proposed for the GMC, to make sure that there is representation of the laity, that there is enough representation of different voices. For example, and Derrick, you might want to speak to this too, but I recognized in reading some of the guidelines for leadership that the local church lay leader can also serve as the church council chair. And to me, that limits the voices that are around the table, the opportunities for the diversity of thought and experience there. So pick up and follow.
Yeah, no, everything you're saying, Martha, as I've read over the transitional book of discipline, as I have paid attention to the individuals who have been speaking on behalf of the WCA and the GMC, I'm just not seeing that partnership of clergy and laity. I'm not seeing the lifting up of the voices, particularly of young laity. And I have a comparison because I'm a part specifically of a conference that continues to make room for the laity, that continues to value and to lift up the voice of the laity in the life of the church, from the local church all the way through the conference. And so again, it remains to be seen, and I will give lots of room there. But I'm currently not seeing the ways that laity really have a true seat at the table and their voice is lifted up as a part of just the way that the GMC, I think, is going to form and do church. It remains to be seen, but that is a concern that I have around the laity for sure.
And I would just add again a polity piece to that from the Board of Ordained Ministry. A lot of people, I've seen Lonnie Brooks as one of the guys that I've seen in the chat here, one of many people who's a prominent layperson and has advocated for lay people in the denomination for years and years. Currently on the Board of Ordained Ministries in the United Methodist Church, 20 to 33% of the board has to be lay. And with the GMC, the language is up to 33%. And so there's a maximum of 33%. There is no minimum. So a bishop who makes those nominations could theoretically say that there will be no lay people on the Board of Ordained Ministry. And I think is that likely to happen? Well, I want to say no, but I also know that a whole host of GMC people have read this Buyer Beware series that I did. They read it before the last iteration of the document, and they've only made one change that seems to be in response to the cautions that I pointed out. So totally their prerogative. But if that was an omission, if that was an error, it would have been very easy for them to fix that. And having not fixed that, that just makes me think that it's probably not an error.
I wanted to follow up. This is very helpful. So I think for me, one of the things that I really love and sort of envy about the GMC is they get to start over on some things. like it's hard in the Methodist Church. Like we've got a structure, we've got, I know from personal experience that changing the laws of the United Methodist Church can be difficult. So they get to, start over on some things. But that also means there's a lot of change. And we don't know how it's all going to get sorted out. And, they may add some stuff, but we are watching along the way because a lot of that transitional book of doctrines and disciplines is there. And there will be, of course, some change in the United Methodist Church over time too, but we've got more fixed, a lot more fixed. All right, so I'm a theologian, so I'm excited that we're going on to a question now about differences in theology. So one of the very common things that gets said, and I've even working on an article on this by the leaders of the Global Methodist Church and the Wesley Covenant Association, is that United Methodist Church has a weak theology, especially in terms of Christology and biblical interpretation. So is that true? How is the doctrine of the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church different?
Rebekah, there's some. I'll just jump in as a core issue. As a campus minister, one of the things that I get to do is invite college-aged young adults into reclaiming the scriptures, diving into the text, and beginning to understand how the word of God was given to us, the ways that it is formed over time, the way that it has been shaped, and how we as Wesleyans read the text. One of the things I love to do is remind my students about our creeds, the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. And if I really had my way, we'd be reciting the Athanasian Creed in our congregations. I really appreciate deeply our core theological beliefs around virgin birth. I appreciate deeply our sacramental theology. These are tools that I get to put in the hands of college-age young adults. And the reason I put them in the hands of college-age young adults is that it's what I've been given. It is the leadership and the instruction and the teaching that I've been given. And I think one of the things that is maybe different for this generation in particular, but I think many people, is that people want to be able to ask questions, to lean in, to look at other perspectives. And the truth is, my degree is in history. We, as followers of Jesus, have never always believed the same things about the Bible, even about Jesus. And I recognize, again, that there's a desire to bring it all down to a set of confessions. But I do believe that it's one of the unique things about the United Methodist Church, that we have created space, our theological task, to be about that work of listening to each other, holy conferencing around the scriptures. And I'm just not sure that we will see that in the GMC. I'm not sure we're going to see that kind of rigor and understanding of the diversity of thought that still brings us all to the table.
And Derrick, I would go a step further with that too, because some of you with your history will remember, although the name is escaping me, the Diatessaron, I think was the name of it. There was, in the very early first centuries of Christianity, an effort to say, let's not have four gospels. Let's just kind of stick them together and make one gospel. And those folks were denounced as heretics. So we have four gospels that tell the same story, but tell it in different ways from each other. And we claim historically as Christians that diversity is a good thing. So I think it's foundational to who we are. It's significant that, again, there's been arguments about this for a long time. It's significant that there's no mention of the Wesley quadrilateral in the GMC. I know the easy response to that is we don't use the quadrilateral right. And even the Odin, who founded the quadrilateral, rejected it later on in life, which is not really true. It's true-ish. But I thank God for the quadrilateral as a way for us to process our thinking with the brains that God's given us. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is wrongly used, in my opinion. Sometimes it is wrongly used. Scripture is supposed to be the base, and then we use other lenses through which to see scripture. But the GMC abandons that entirely. And the rigidity of the doctrine is, if my heart is as your heart, take my hand. The GMC says, no, never mind. If your thinking is the same as my thinking, take my hand.
But don't we have the same articles of religion and confession of faith?
Yes. So the base theology is the same, but it's then what you do with that. So somebody had a question noticing that the Schleitheim Confession was inserted into the Global Methodist Church's documents. I will confess, I'm not very familiar with that particular document. It's not in there as like an article of faith that you have to believe in, but it has an Anabaptist background. So why would that be included as even background literature for people to consider reading? Well, I mean, that doesn't fit with our theology, but I'm convinced, and I could be wrong, but I'm convinced that there's places that you'll find in the GMC where, just as some people on a more conservative side will say that, well, the UMC believes what we say, but we also make lots of space for other people to believe other things. That, for example, one of the hallmarks of that particular confession is, in fact, I pulled it up, that when it comes to baptism, baptism is administered only to those who have consciously repented, turned away from sin. All right, so that's believers' baptism. We have United Methodist churches that only practice believers' baptism. They have it on their websites. I could point you to 2 different churches right now that have that on their websites. Those pastors have not been brought up on charges. And I'm not holding my breath that they will be, because from a political standpoint, the polity piece, again, they're making space for the people who they want to make space for in the GMC, and not for those who they don't want to make space for. That's my opinion, but I think it's a pretty informed opinion. I mean, those charges aren't coming. And although it pays lip service, the transitional book of Doctrine and Discipline plays lip service to infant baptism, it weakens the statements that we have right now about that. So certainly, you know, it's still Methodist. I'm not going to say it's not Methodist, but they do weaken some of the key theology that we believe in.
So when I asked who wants to talk about this one, of course, I'm the one that most wants to talk about this. But I'm not a panelist, but I will say a couple of things because I can't help it. So, you know, all of these people who do Methodist studies, we're all buddies, right? So that's the part I check every time they change it, because there are some little changes along the way. And I know, oh, that's what Scott Jones used to argue, and that's what Billy Abraham used to argue. And oh, and now they're 44 sermons, and now they're 53 sermons. So you can see the fingerprints, and that's something that Lonnie Brooks was saying, is that you can see some of the influences of some GMC sort of scholars, WCA scholars on this. But I think the point I've heard so clearly here is, yeah, the same basic shared documents and the shared classical claims about who Christ is, the Trinity, all of those things, Christ's resurrection, and so on, all of that. I think the difference is going to, as y'all said, is the issue of how comfortable you are with other people not believing that, and also with giving conference boards of ordained ministry room to interpret that, because that's what we do now. And what North Texas expects is different than what Calpac expects, is different than what South Georgia expects. So in any case, that's a little more than the host should say.
Well, Becca jumped in, so I'm just going to have to jump in a little bit, okay? A little bit of misinformation is out there. They're saying that once people leave for the GMC, the UMC is suddenly going to change its doctrine and not believe in Jesus Christ. If we're going to have the same confession of faith and articles of religion, we all know, well, if you're a Methodist nerd, you know that there are restrictive rules, that General Conference cannot change that. And you would have to go through amendments of the Constitution to have that happen. And we have not had that change since we merged in 1968 with the Evangelical United Brethren in the Methodist Church. So that's a misinformation. So if you're hearing people say that we're not going to believe in Jesus Christ, you heard Derrick earlier, we believe in Jesus Christ, you know, and that's not going to change ever. We are a Christian church. Okay, I'm going to shut up there. And
but Izzy, that's really important, because that's one of the great, it's a fantastic bumper sticker, right? We'll only say the Apostles' Creed with our fingers crossed behind our back. I will say the Apostles' Creed without my fingers crossed behind my back. And the large majority of United Methodists that I know will do the same thing. That's not a thing, no matter what they tell you. That's just not a thing.
You want to jump in here, Martha?
I don't know what I can add. I just continue, as you all have said, that our core doctrines, our common essentials of the faith are not going to change. That's who we are. And whether we are United Methodist or Global Methodist, we're both saying that those are our common doctrines.
Well, it seems then that the issue is not really differences in doctrine. It seems that the issue really here is tolerance for a big tent church and discussion and debate and healthy doubting, of our faith, and just kind of wrestling with this tension amongst each other versus insistence on uniformity. Is that true? For those that have read what does this look like in terms of enforcement? It looks like that's the difference. It's not about whether we're going to end up believing in Jesus Christ or not.
I think that's the case, Izzy. And I think for those who remember back to the 2019 General Conference, the traditional plan that passed and parts of which are in effect right now, when you look through that, some of us talked about that being a mean-spirited plan. And I maintain that still today. It was a mean-spirited plan. It was all about enforcement. And you'll even hear that, right? You hear the language of, will you enforce the book of discipline? I mean, if it's a covenant, I mean, you don't really mean enforce a book of discipline. What you really mean is, will you enforce that one particular paragraph of the book of discipline? The bishop's not on me because we haven't taken the 7 special Sundays offerings this last year. It's that one piece. But under the GMC, I think I said this already, there are 4 different ways that a bishop can unilaterally ensure that a person is not a pastor of a church. And there is no recourse for those. There's no due process. The Board of Ordained Ministry can approve somebody to be ordained, and the bishop can say, no, I'm not going to ordain that person. And there's no recourse. The bishop cannot appoint somebody through the guaranteed appointment process, and there's no recourse. The bishop can remove a pastor because of not following the doctrines or practices, is the language of the GMC. Well, the doctrines or practices, the practices would encompass everything in that transitional book of discipline. So if you don't do one thing in that book of discipline, you could be removed. And again, there's no due process for the pastor. The church, by a 2/3 vote, can remove a member from active membership and make them an inactive member, who at that point loses the right to be on any committees or any church governance, can't even vote in church matters. And then after 2 years being inactive, they can remove them from membership of the church. And the member has no recourse for that. There's no due process for the member. The denomination can remove a church from membership in the GMC. So you might join the GMC in good faith, but the GMC Transitional Leadership Council can remove you. And again, the church has no recourse for that. And one of the things specifically that you can be removed for is for not paying your apportionments in full 100%. Technically, paying 1/12 of your apportionments every month. I don't think that's what they would do, but if you don't pay your apportionments in full, so the apportionment question, some churches' apportionments are going to go up because now you actually have to pay them. They work really, really hard at making sure that everybody does exactly. And I mean, if you want a super, super high level of accountability, again, buyer beware. Maybe that's what you want. And if that's the case, again, God bless you. Go with God's grace.
I'll just add here just a couple of stories that I have heard here on the ground in congregations that are in the process of disaffiliation, who have been talking about disaffiliating for a bit. I sat with some people a couple of weeks ago, a couple who have been together for a couple of decades, but because of health issues related to insurance, they are not married. They are as committed to each other as I've seen a man and woman could be, but they are not married. And again, it has to do with insurance and liabilities. And they are very afraid of not just their ability to be full members of the congregation that they're a part of that is talking about disaffiliation, but the opportunity to bring their gifts, the opportunity to serve, the opportunity to actually feel like they are part of that community because of the rhetoric they've heard from their friends and other members of the church about the direction that the GMC wants to take the church. So it could very well be individuals within that one congregation, super anecdotal conversation there. But I want us to lift up and really give some thought about how that couple feels. There's a pastor friend of mine whose teenage child is experiencing gender dysphoria at this moment in this season of their life. And the child heard a friend of that pastor in a sermon talking about different issues around transness. And the child runs into their parents' room crying. Is this the church we're going to? And again, one story. But I think that one of the things that if the GMC does have a different perspective on sameness, a different perspective on welcome, I think they've got to get that message out, because the message that I think people are feeling on the ground is that if your life doesn't match up with very specific narratives, maybe you'll be welcomed in the church, but you can't actually be a full member of that congregation. If your life leads down a road of divorce, or if your life leads down a road where LGBTQ becomes a really big part of your family, not sure we can hang out in a GMC congregation. And so if the GMC believes it's different, that there's a different perspective, they've got to get that word out, because right now people on the ground are very concerned.
I wanted to add one of the things I appreciate about this, the title of this and about David's blog is it's look before you leap and buyer beware. It's not don't leap. It's not don't buy. It's just look it up. So I would really encourage people here who are considering it to download that Transitional Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, the most recent version, which is on the GMC main website, and the Book of Discipline, which is also available, and just look things up. It's, the book, they're both boring, but you can still find the stuff. You can still find the stuff in them. So I mean, just look into it and be sure you know what you're getting into. And as Martha said earlier, it's not a big hurry. It's not an immediate thing that has to happen.
Yeah, and I think just to add too, it's not that yes or no question over one issue. It's who we say we are and who we want to be in the future.
Well, okay, we just talked about theology, but theology really is seen concretely in how we live our faith in the world, right? Otherwise, it's just empty dogma, right? So I love the fact that our church has a very robust set of social principles that guide us. Is there going to be something like that in the GMC? Anybody? Did you see anything, social principles like about justice, war, divorce? We already know their stance on LGBTQ people, but there's a host of other things. Like right now, we're talking about abortion and all that.
Yeah, they've got a very abbreviated version of the social principles. There's I want to say 13, someplace in the teens, number of statements they have. One of those is on abortion, and is very clearly pro-life. In fact, there might even be a couple of statements that are about that pro-life perspective. And again, I would just encourage people to go to the source and to read those. It's definitely, for better or worse, it depends on your point of view, it's definitely much more succinct than what we have.
And I would say too, one difference too is the difference in aspects of social change. So for example, they do have statements against racism, but it's about the sin of racism in our hearts. And it doesn't get as much as the United Methodist statements do on some of the broader structural issues and the way that, that sin is woven into different parts of the life of the church and the law and all that. And also, oh, never mind. Okay, just one interesting thing. So, the mission of the United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? So the first mission that the WCA, this is before the formation of the GMC, was to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the world. And then I think it was to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the entire world, but they dropped off for the transformation of the world, which I thought was really interesting. And it's different now. But I think one of the things that I'm wondering, and we don't know yet, but you don't see that really broader social witness tradition as much in the short thing we do have. So I really hope that the GMC will have a robust sense of social sin, and also the way that we participate in making a better world and transforming the world.
Can I just really quickly just jump in on that? And I just want to name again, we know that these things are happening in our world, but this past weekend, we had several acts of violence against people of color. And I can tell you, at least when it comes to young people of color, they need to be able to walk into their congregation, hear a pastor and a lay leader and a worship leader not just talk about the sin of racism, but to repent of the ways that racism has been embedded in systems and institutions, and also then actively work to rid our systems and institutions of that racism, of that white supremacy. And I know those are words that become really charged very quickly, but when you see individuals driving hundreds of miles to a grocery store because of white supremacist beliefs, we got to hear a church speak to that. And I look forward to GMC pastors speaking very clearly against the sin of racism and in the ways that it is embedded in our systems, and the ways that the GMC is going to work to rid themselves of those sins and of those systems. I look forward to it.
Amen.
Yeah, and then one more piece that I would mention is just, again, the doctrinal aspect of that. There's debate, in the United Methodist Church about, do you have to agree with all the social principles? When I teach on the social principles, I tell people, I guarantee you, if you read this whole thing, you'll find at least one place where you say, I'm so glad to be a part of a church that believes this. And you'll find at least one where you say, I can't believe I'm part of a church that believes this. And I think that's true. And for the GMC, again, that's doctrine now. So if you don't believe and agree with all of those things, then there can be repercussions for that.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, and then we'll question the chat before we go to the next question. So I think that's really important. And that is part of the reason it's shorter and more focused is because the social principles, really, we don't enforce them. We don't require people to live. We make recommendations, right? So I think the intention is that it's a document that people will be held accountable to. So somebody asked in the chat, is there a statement against racism? Yes, there is. Again, it's short, and we don't know what this. I suspect this is going to stay shorter than a very long United Methodist one, but it's focused on the sin of racism. And the need for repentance of racism. It doesn't do as much, and also it doesn't get at the social aspects, but they do that. Okay, so I wanted to move now to a question about inclusion. So we've been talking about the GMC and their social witness. What's the UMC going to look like? So what does this mean for our ongoing questions about full inclusions of persons who are LGBTQIA in our church and all its ministries?
I'll start with this one. I think we have to recognize that we're still a work in progress. We've said that before. It's not going to be an immediate change, but I can only envision what the church will look like in the future. The UMC will look like in the future if we continue this work to look at the institution and our history, to look at how we need to extend the invitation. I think some of that's evident already in how over the last decade or decade and a half, we've been working on the social principles to try to make them more global in nature, and really hearing the voices of those members of our connection outside the United States. I think this is an example of how when we put our efforts and put our work in something, we can really change it to be reflective of who we are. And so while I don't think everything's going to magically change in 2024 when there's General Conference, but there are so many beautiful possibilities of bringing the beloved community and the kingdom of God to life.
Well, one thing I think is true here, while Derrick is going to jump in a little bit, I was just going to say that I'm just going to say whatever the church is going to do in 2024 or 2028, one thing is never going to change, that God is going to give birth to my queer siblings, both in the UMC and in the GMC. God will continue to call my queer siblings to ministry. God will call my queer siblings to get married, and have families. That's not going to change.
I wanted to just jump in here too to say that we've been criticizing the GMC. They're going to want to be inclusive, but will people feel included? And those are two different things.
Yes.
And I think that's going to have to be something the United Methodist Church, we're going to have to deal with the same thing. We want to be inclusive, but are people going to feel, and it's always going to be a push, and we're going to have to repent and work hard, to really be a church that's inclusive and welcoming, not only in terms of LGBTQIA issues, but in terms of issues around ethnicity and race and disability and so many other issues.
Rebekah, I was just going to say something similar to that, and I wanted to make it really clear that we should not assume that in 2024, all of a sudden, that's a piece of the United Methodist Church that's going to be what we on the panel, I think, would all say would be perfected. And it will be, a number of years before that's, if ever, fully lived out in the United Methodist Church. So that's in some ways the beginning of I'm just speaking from a polity standpoint. That's kind of what I've been trying to focus on. The polity of our denomination will not allow for that to instantly change in 2024. It will probably be realistically no earlier than 2028 before we have the kind of organization that we would hope for. And we all know organizational change is not the same thing as heart change.
And I'll just add that this is our church's journey to perfection. We are on a journey to perfection as it relates to women being invited into the full life of the church. We are on a journey to perfection when it comes to people of color, African Americans, being a truly global church and not American-centric. We are on a journey when it comes to embracing all of God's children, including queer and LGBTQ individuals. Like, this is our continued journey of becoming the kind of church that elevates and magnifies the massive welcome of the gospel for the sake of the world. And so, we are, and in some ways, our polity catches up to our spirituality. Our polity catches up to our obedience in that regard. And so, we've got some time. We're going to be on this journey for a bit.
Well, let's talk about, there's this upheaval in the church, there's uncertainty, there's this debate, but let's talk about how this really affects our local churches. Because I really believe, and I always tell this to a lot of people, that, you meet Jesus Christ not on the floor of General Conference. You meet Jesus Christ when they cross the doors of your church and sees our members and are embraced by our members. So how is this affecting this current debate in the church and this question of leaving or staying affecting our local church, especially in the ministries that you are in right now? Martha, as a layperson and the lay leader for your conference?
Yeah, I think it's, folks are tired. It's hard to get individuals to step up to leadership roles on the conference and district level for us anyway at this time, because there's so many distractions and so much happening. Lovett Weems had an article a couple of weeks ago where he said, we have to move from the distractions, but we have to recognize that it's the leaders who are distracted. So I think it's our job as lay leaders to try to bring that focus back to our mission and ministry and how we are to be the church in the community these days. That mission hasn't stopped. That ministry hasn't stopped. And while it's, of course, varied in different contexts, it's still our job and our responsibility. And so how do we bring that focus back to the mission and ministry? There's still amazing things happening in local churches. there are still lives being changed and new people coming in. And, you know, we still have the power to change individual lives and communities. We just have to really put our energy and our focus there.
Following up on Martha's point, and again, I lean into stories, I lean into individuals, especially as we start talking about local churches. And, you know, I've got some friends right now who are really hurting because they believed that they were a part of congregations that recognized diversity of perspective, that recognized that unlike other denominations, we were trying to create spaces of grace for people, regardless of how they entered into our congregations and into our communities. And what they're feeling right now is that, again, if they cannot completely affirm every single confession, every single idea, that they are no longer welcome in those spaces. And again, some of this may just be rhetoric. Some of it may be the polarization of that's much larger than the United Methodist Church in the moment. But many of my friends and colleagues, clergy and laity, are just in pain and are feeling quite abandoned by many. And so I think, you know, and I was having a conversation today with Alice Williams, my co-lay leader, about how we actually are going to think about the space of grace and the space, just holding space for those who have been harmed in these last few years of preparing for this separation. So do you think that that's some of what's happening, some of what's happening in our local churches? I also want to say, and this is a point of hope, I'm amazed in my ministry to young adults and my interactions with young adults across our global connection, they are feeling even more called to this work of being a part of the United Methodist Church. I'm amazed, because I think in any other moment of so much family drama, they would be like, I don't want anything to do with that. But actually what I'm seeing is young adults who are saying, you know, I see who this church wants to be. I see the ways that we want to build the beloved community for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the transformation of the world, for the sake of Jesus. And I want to be a part of that. And it's just beautiful to watch. And again, it's a tension, because they're watching the pain that many are going through, but they are saying, yes, I want to get on board with that, because I actually think that this is a church. I can be a part of a church that I can bring my friends and my family members to. And so I do think that's some of what's happening on the ground in local churches and campus ministries and fresh expressions and all of the different ways that we are experiencing ministry as United Methodists across the global connection.
Thank you. Jim, would you put up the poll question about full inclusion we're talking? And I just want to say, I've seen some discouraging comments in the chat just about how hard it is to hear that it's not going to happen quickly. I just want to say, I think everybody on this call is committed to full inclusion and to working on full inclusion. It's just, so we're in what I call polity hell. It's hard to change. It's complex the way we set things up to change the rules, but we're committed to working on it and to making as our church as just and inclusive can be. But it's going to take some time, and I regret that. If y'all would fill out the poll. So we've been talking some now about how all of this affects our local church, and we want to talk a little more about in the specifics about churches. So we've heard from the Judicial Council that at least at the moment, annual conferences can't withdraw, but we know that churches can disaffiliate and join the GMC or just become independent, and we have a lot of questions about that. So I just want to throw a bunch out. I know that Martha, you've been doing presentations on this. So here's some of the questions, like, what are the rules for church disaffiliation? What should my church consider as it makes its decision? If my church wants to stay in the UMC, what do we need to do? And if it wants to go to the UMC, what do we need to do? Or what if my church wants to do a different thing than I want to do? And so on and so forth. Can you give us some answers about just those nitty-gritty questions about what happens on the ground in local churches who are thinking about this?
Yeah, in Virginia, we've been doing presentations to talk through our process and be able to share accurate and factual information with every local church so that we're all in the same place with information. And so in our process, the first step is to contact the district superintendent if a church is interested in entering into discernment about disaffiliation. Once the district superintendent receives that message, then they will schedule an information meeting with the local church. One of the parts of our process is to then have a very planned, prayerful minimum of 30-day discernment period. It can be much longer than that, but a 30-day minimum. So, paragraph 2553 was the paragraph adopted at the called General Conference in 2019. And it's the process recommended by the Council of Bishops and supported by the Judicial Council's recent ruling as the preferred process for disaffiliation. We hear that referred to as the Taylor disaffiliation process sometimes, or the tailored legislation, because of the author who's behind that with General Conference legislation. It allows for congregations to exit with their property for reasons of conscience related to human sexuality. It does require exiting churches to meet certain financial and procedural obligations to be released from the trust clause. It requires a 2/3 majority vote of the professing members of the congregation present at a called church conference, and then requires approval or ratification of the annual conference session. One of the things to keep in mind is that particular piece of legislation is time limited. It has an ending date of December 31st, 2023. I think in most cases, people are thinking there will be some exceptions made when that time period comes to an end. But that's the reason that many of our annual conferences have already announced call sessions of annual conference after the summer to be able to process those requests for disaffiliations that are there. It's important to remember that in paragraph 2553, there are some standard terms for a disaffiliation agreement. The local church shall pay any unpaid apportionments for the 12 months prior to disaffiliation, and then an additional 12 months of apportionments. The disaffiliating local church will have the right to retain their property, real and personal, tangible and intangible, with all of those transfers of property being made prior to the disaffiliation and agreed upon, negotiated in that disaffiliation agreement. Local church shall contribute to the withdrawal liability in the amount equal to its share of the unfunded pension liabilities for their annual conference. And then if the church has other liabilities, if there are debts, loans, other liabilities assigned, those will have to be a part of that disaffiliation agreement, as well as payment terms that are coming there. I think one of the things we see happening is that there's a statement in paragraph 2553 that says the annual conferences may develop additional standard terms that are not inconsistent with the standards of the paragraph. But no matter what, the full cost can't be known until the ratification at annual conference, until all the legal fees are anticipated and calculated into that. I think one of the other questions, Rebekah, was what do we need to do if we want to stay?
Yeah.
And that is just focus on the mission and ministry. There's no decision that has to be made, no vote that has to be taken. However, if a church and a clergy person have different ways of thinking, that has to be considered too. A church can certainly make a decision to disaffiliate. A clergy person can make a decision to withdraw. That language is important, the disaffiliation for a church and the withdrawal for a clergy person, or vice versa. The clergy person may stay and the church disaffiliate. But again, I think it's just important that we remember that we don't have to make that decision right now. It can be a matter of prayerful discernment and time. But we need to be careful with knowing exactly what is in paragraph 2553 and recognizing how each of our individual annual conferences are processing those requests.
Thank you, Martha. So we've almost come to the end of our time, and we need to turn it back to Harvey in a minute to close us out. But I really want to just thank everybody. This has been so helpful, and I want to close with everybody giving a response to what are you the most excited about as you look to the future of the GMC. If y'all would just give us a short couple of words, and then Harvey's going to answer that and take us off. What are y'all looking forward to? Derrick, you want to jump in on that one?
I'm looking forward to the young adults that I am currently leading and taking care of. I'm looking forward to them continuously finding their place in our church and leading with energy and passion and love for Christ and a desire to continue to advance the mission of Jesus and the gospel in the world. Amen.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to a lot, but I'm going to keep my polity hat on to answer that question. Those of you who have been at General Conference, you know that there's every other vote that happens before the vote that everybody's waiting for. And every decision that we make has a pretext of what's this going to mean for the vote we're going to take on inclusion. And so from that context, I'm so looking forward to not having constant gridlock on everything so that we can be about the mission of the church, which is to share the good news of the grace and love of Jesus Christ, who is our Lord and our Savior, with all the world.
And friends, I would invite y'all in the audience to also, some of you are putting this in the chat. What do you hope for the United Methodist Church? And I'm grateful to you for doing that. Martha?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the thing I think I look most forward to are not only the possibilities, but the possibilities that are before us when we do no harm to each other. We've been in this season when we say so many things and we behave in ways that intentionally and unintentionally cause harm to one another. And I just look forward to a time when we can all join at the table and share in conversation, build relationships, share in the work of building the kingdom of God without hurting one another.
Thank you, Martha. Thanks to all of you. And Harvey, you're going to take us on. Oh, and your paper was rustling against your mic at the beginning. I don't know if you could.
I think I've got that solved.
Good.
Let me know.
Good.
My hopes and my affirmation and advocacy for the United Methodist Church are similar to what others have said already. I am holding a hope for a more open and welcoming UMC in which painful, discriminatory, still harmful language is no longer part of our book of discipline. I'm looking for a future in which the phrase inclusive church is no longer an oxymoron, as it is now, but a future in which the term inclusive church becomes an unnecessary redundancy. Church is automatically inclusive in the Bible. I say because I believe in the centrality of Scripture. One of the basic differences that has been hinted at, and it's been in the chat, GMC and UMC have different perspectives on the Bible. My perspective is the Bible contains the Word of God and also the words of culture. And there were people wondering why we just don't believe in God's Word as it is in some of the chat offerings. Do you believe, if you ask that question, that Leviticus 20 should be followed rigidly, that gay men who have sex with each other are to be killed? Are you in favor of murdering all gay men? Or that women should be in subordinate and submissive roles in the church as well as in a marriage? Or do you believe that slavery should still be practiced? Because all of those are in Ephesians 5, Colossians 3. The Bible says Jesus is the Word of God. So if we use Jesus as the benchmark, that provides some clarity for us. The way I said it in what I prepared beforehand, I rely the most in our book on the thousands of verses about justice and compassion and welcoming the outsider. Jesus says in Luke 6, it's a commandment, be compassionate, period. Caring for the vulnerable, and said, instead of the 6 or 7 clobber verses that reflect a culture of 2,500 years ago. There are differences in value in the statements of the Bible, and the best resource, if you really want to do some work and study, is Adam Hamilton's almost 10-year-old book now, Making Sense of the Bible, where he talks about the words of culture also showing up in the Bible. I'm staying UMC because I believe we can be a big tent church in which these words from Father Wesley still prevail. Though we may not think alike, may we not love alike. And if your heart is as my heart, then give me your hand. And I think unity is different from uniformity of doctrine. Several of us have referred to that. Our unity resides in following Jesus Christ, who himself found not uniformity, but diversity, even among his closest friends, including Simon the Zealot. Look up what a zealot is. And Matthew the tax collector. Somebody said they had to sleep on opposite ends of the campsite every night when Jesus was traveling with them. I am deeply grateful and so impressed tonight for all of our experts and resource persons, our multitude of participants. I want to give all of us in a moment, and Jim Dozer, you can put the screen up, for a chance to exercise the spiritual discipline of generosity. Generosity is a spiritual discipline, just like prayer, worship, study, and service. The advocacy you have heard tonight from our UMARC team, and we advertised this as an advocacy program in favor of the UMC. This advocacy is possible only because of the servant hearts and the deeply spiritual acts of giving from our participants. You may even have noticed on the website a list of people who have sponsored this event tonight, and the folks on this panel have put their names on that list as generous givers. And that includes Harvey and Judy Martz and Don and Bonnie Messer and Professor Miles and others. If you are wanting to give, you may do so on our website, umarc.org. We're going to keep this up for just a few more seconds. So in case you need to copy down any information, we will welcome your practicing the spiritual discipline of generosity. We're going to take just a few seconds as we think to ourselves phrases and even songs about giving. God loves a cheerful giver. It is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Those are parts of the Bible, along with many others, that still are very important for me. Hang with us for a few seconds, and we're going to close formally with prayer. Gracious Spirit, we pray that our Methodist movement may be as welcoming, as inclusive, and as subversive as our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And that we may tonight and always embody our mantra of open hearts, open minds, and open doors. Amen.
Thanks, everyone. We're grateful for you.